Welcome back to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show. Happy that you've taken time to be part of the program today. Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Margot Ann Kelley is an essayist, nonfiction author, gardener, photographer, visual artist, and resides in Maine. Welcome to the program, Margot.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, go ahead. We want to thank you for taking time and not only about to educate Holly and myself, but all of our listeners. We thank you for that.
Oh, I'm delighted to have the chance.
So in your book, Foodtopia, you talk about the Back to Land movement. Please tell us more about that movement, what it entails, and what you found out about it.
Sure. So when I first started researching it, what I thought was that it was based basically in the hippie era, and so basically baby boomers who went back to the land. But as I did more research, I found out that people in the United States went back to the land 5 different times, starting in the 1840s and then going all the way up until the 2010s. And each of the times that they went back to the land, people were doing it because they were interested in creating a sense of greater freedom and greater equality and a better connection to the land. But the thing that I was really surprised by and that connected them all together was that all of them were also really interested in the way that food was central to what they were doing and going back to the land and creating all of those other parts and making them all work together.
Almost like they gotten so far away and kind of like a reset.
Exactly. In fact, what some of them said is that they had to go back to the beginning, and the beginning was their connection to the land.
Oh, that's definitely very interesting. So community is important in your research and writing. What is something you enjoy about the community of growers and gardeners? Any thoughts on how that may have changed post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic actually increased the connection that people felt as growers and gardeners. One of the things that I noticed was that more people were gardening during the pandemic, and more people were contributing their food to food pantries and trying to help each other and trying to encourage other people to be growers. And so it was like the people who already cared about growing and cared about gardening were encouraging everybody else to do the same thing because they knew that it was a source of comfort and a source of solace during the pandemic.
Well, your newest book, your most recent book, A Gardener at the End of the World, what is it about? What can you tell us that may intrigue our listeners to pick up a copy?
It's about 2 big things. First, it's set in 2020, so it's all about the pandemic. But equally importantly, it's about me in the garden during the pandemic and trying to look at how gardens and food and the way that we connect to food has shaped our relationship to the natural world. And then also the flip side of that, how that has also contributed to things like the existence of pandemics. And so what I thought when I started out with that book was that it was going to be just a pure source of comfort. But then I found out that the pandemic and the garden were more intimately connected than I had ever expected.
Well, you in addition to that, you have several other books as well you've written.
I have, yeah.
And can you share a little bit about those as well?
Sure. So almost all the books that I write are about people's relationships to the natural world. And usually I'm looking at them from like a more short-term perspective. I'm looking at them in the 1 year, 50 year, 100-year kind of time frames. But in A Gardener at the End of the World, because I started looking at pandemics, I went all the way back to when we became humans and looking at how our relationship to the natural world evolved as we became agricultural humans, and then also how it evolved as we became people who wanted to have more land and have more access to land. And so we changed the world as we changed. And that's one of the things that's different in A Gardener at the End of the World than in some of the earlier books.
Fantastic. So I saw on your social media you had displayed your garlic scapes as a floral arrangement in a way. I thought that was really cute. Aside from decor, what do you like to use your garlic scapes for?
Well, I think they look really good as a floral arrangement too. Thank you. But the big thing that I use them for is making pesto. I don't know if either of you make pesto, but I do. And sometimes, typically when you make pesto, you use garlic and you use a lot of basil, some parsley, some oregano. So what I do is I take the garlics and I skip all of the garlic buds and use the garlic scapes. And then I also take them and use them for like a third of what I would normally use for the basil, and they make a fantastic pesto, which may or may not be appealing to your listeners, but it is so delicious.
Yeah, we have made garlic pesto, and it was very, very garlicky. It was more than what we had anticipated.
It's milder and more even if you use garlic scapes rather than garlic.
Yeah, Joy meant garlic scape pesto.
Yeah.
It was still kind of potent to us, but maybe we have to tweak our recipe a little bit.
Yeah, tweak it.
It was fun, though.
It's fun and it's delicious. Oh, but don't use the white part.
Okay.
That's a really important part. Yeah, don't use the part at the end because that part is the super spiciest part.
That makes sense. So we all know the pandemic has changed a lot of things for many. When you've, done your research, talked to gardeners, artists, what is something that changed for the better and created growth out of the pandemic?
Well, there are a couple things for gardeners. I think that a lot of people during the pandemic kind of hunkered down and they did a better job gardening than they might have done in earlier years because they had the opportunity to spend more time just closely paying attention to their gardener. Here in my community, one of the things that was really beautiful is that a lot of the local gardeners contribute food to our local food bank, and they contributed so much food that we started having a Friday market on top of our regular food pantry that was available for anybody. And even after the pandemic, that's continued. And so one of the things that I really like is the way that the gardeners and the community at large came together and they saw that all of this local food is a wonderful thing to be cherished. And so they're all enjoying it, and the gardeners have continued to try and work that hard to keep that available in the years since the pandemic.
And that was my next point, that we've seen that big spike during the pandemic. And then when, quote unquote, the world got back to normal, a lot of that kind of plateaued or decreased to a certain level because, we don't have to stay at home anymore. We don't need to garden.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I'm sure that's happening in a lot of places. And it's happening here too. I will admit that I am not gardening as carefully this year as I was gardening in 2020 or 2021. But everybody now knows that we can contribute this stuff to the food pantry and that there are plenty of people who want it and who will appreciate having the opportunity to have it. And so some of the things that happened as a part of the pandemic have continued. And those are heartening for me because, of course, as you know, so much about those years was terrible, but there have been a few upsides from it, and that's one of them.
Right. Now, in your book, A Gardener at the End of the World, working through this and writing this book, was there I would never have thought that, or that was, an amazing thing that you learned in the creation of this book?
There was a ton of that. Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, there were so many surprises, and there were so many things that were about the relationship between viruses and seeds and about how humans and viruses and seeds have all co-evolved that I never, ever would have expected. But as I spent the time digging into the research because I had the chance to just be in kind of a solitary situation and doing a ton of research, I learned so much that year. And a lot of it was shocking, to be completely honest. Like one of the things that I wrote about was the relationship between the Columbus's journeys and how potatoes moved to the old world and how some of the germs from the new world moved to the old world. And I hadn't anticipated any of that. So there were some real big surprises that were important discoveries for me.
Interesting.
So, you have obviously your writing experience. How did you get into gardening? Some people start young, some people discover it later in life. How did you get into gardening?
I discovered it sort of in quasi middle age. So I was a college professor, and so I had the summers off, and we moved to Maine. We found a summer house in Maine, and so we moved up here. And I looked around, and all my neighbors were gardeners, and I had never really thought about it. My parents hadn't gardened, my relatives hadn't gardened, but all the people around me did. And the first year that I tried to have a garden, by sheer good luck, I had a great one. It was a great year. I had good soil. I was very lucky. And so I fell in love with it. And I had no idea when I started how hard it was going to be in the long run, because it was just such a perfect first year. But that was 23 years ago. And I've kept at it ever since. And I've learned a ton in the meantime.
Fantastic. Well, we really appreciate having you on the program. Can you tell us more where to find your work, your books, etc.?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So I've got a website. It's margotandkelley.com. I'm on Instagram also at margotandkelley. My publisher is Godine, a wonderful publisher in Boston, Massachusetts, and you can find the books there. And you can also find them on Amazon, and you can probably find them at local bookstores near you, small indie bookstores. And so Foodtopia and A Gardener at the End of the World are the most recent ones. And so they're the ones that right now I'm the most excited about. And I would love for you to have a chance to check them out.
Do you have a favorite book, or is it like children you can't say?
I'm not supposed to say in public.
Okay. Well, Margot, we greatly appreciate the time you've offered us, not only Holly and myself, but all of our listeners, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.